What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video. Today we're going to be talking about the Magicka Sorcerer. So Mag Sorc is still a very much wanted DPS. In trials, they pull pretty good DPS, especially as a ranged DPS spec. And generally speaking, they're highly wanted in raid groups, mainly for the conduit synergy. So it's a unique synergy that helps improve Alkosh uptime for tanks. So having that Sorc there really helps with maintaining Alkosh uptime. It doesn't necessarily have to be one Sorc, it can be two Sorcs or even three Sorcs. The best teams out there are only running one Sorc. One Mag Sorc for the conduit synergy, but generally speaking, Mag Sorcs are still capable of pulling pretty good DPS. They still definitely lose to Nightblades, but overall, Sorcs do provide some pretty good utility both through conduit synergy as well as the Storm Atronach, which is the only source of Major Berserk right now that is an easy obtained source. So you drop your major, your Atronach, and you have Stamblade or Magblade synergized with it. That improves their DPS, which improves the group DPS, and it also improves your DPS a little bit because it does give the Storm Atronach Major Berserk as well. So just like our other builds, we'll talk about our gear, our skills, our CP point distributions. We'll talk a little bit about gear replacements because this particular build is kind of focused in on playing within melee range. As you can see in my bar here, I do have rearming traps, so we will talk about what you want to do if you are going to be playing completely at ranged. And from there, we'll basically talk about everything you need to know about making this build succeed. And of course, we'll finish things off with 6 random parts so you guys can get an idea of where this build stands compared to other builds and other classes. Builds that are created by me. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. First thing we're going to go over is going to be our gear sets. So like I said earlier, this is going to assume you're able to play at melee range. Now you're not necessarily going to be able to play at melee range, so I'll go over your gear substitutions that you're going to be making if you decide to play at range instead. So the first set we have here is our monster helm. It's going to be Zaan, still the strongest monster helm set for Magicka DPS, hands down. You will notice that I have a max health enchant here on the head, and that's just to help mitigate some of the health loss that we're taking because we are using Witchmother's Potent Brew. Mag Sorc still have really poor Magicka sustain overall, so you will want to use Witchmothers in order to get that additional sustain going. So we are running Zaan with a max health enchant on a large piece. It doesn't necessarily have to be the head, it can be the chest or the legs. I just find it easiest to hit on the head. And we are doing 5 on 1, so we have 5 light, 1 heavy, 1 medium for the extra stats here. For our body piece, this is the set that's always going to be active no matter which bar we're on. It's going to be Siroria. We have the perfect version here, but you can go with the imperfect version. The main difference there is that 5-piece, the additional max Magicka, is not present in the imperfect version. So again, you're not necessarily going to be able to use Siroria very well on certain trials. So the mini trials, that's Asylum and Cloud Rest, Siroria does lose some power because you do need to maintain high number of stacks in order for it to be really, really effective. That being said, though, even if you aren't able to maintain high levels of stacks, Siroria is still pretty strong. But there are other alternatives that you can run instead of Siroria if you feel like you're going to be running around too much and you won't be able to keep track of those stacks very well. We'll talk about replacement monster helm set, and we'll also talk about a replacement for Siroria. The one set that you're not going to want to change is going to be Burning Spellweave. So Sorcs, unlike Nightblades and Templars, do not have 10% additional crit damage. So while Mother's Sorrow is a pretty strong alternative here to Burning Spellweave, you don't have to farm for it. For instance, you can just buy it off guild traders. Burning Spellweave does usually end up eking out just a little bit ahead of Mother's Sorrow. So you can go with really either of them, so Burning Spellweave or Mother's Sorrow. Again, Mother's Sorrow is easier to get because you can buy it. Burning Spellweave, you do have to farm it. So that will be on your jewelry piece, or rather 3 body pieces as well as your front bar. So you do need an Inferno staff. So Mother's Sorrow does have the advantage here because you can just buy an Inferno staff versus Burning Spellweave, or you will have to farm for the Inferno staff weapon. There's no unique drops or named drops, so you will have to fight the last boss of City of Ash 1 or 2 in order to get the Inferno staff here. So for our jewelry glyphs, or traits I should say, and then enchants, we do have 2 Arcane and 1 Bloodthirsty. You can go with 3 Bloodthirsty if you'd like, you can go with 3 Arcane, you can go with any combination of those 2 traits. The difference there isn't going to be too drastic. 3 Bloodthirsty is technically the best, but having that additional resources from Arcane is a good trade-off here for a very, very small drop in DPS. We're talking maybe like 200, 300 DPS drop from changing to Arcane from Bloodthirsty, so it's not that big of a deal if you are running 3 Arcane versus 3 Bloodthirsty. Now we do have a Magicka regen glyph. Like I said earlier, Sorcs have really crap sustain. Like, their sustain is probably the worst in the game right now. They don't really have any sort of moves that help restore Magicka. So we do need that additional regen glyph, even if we are using Witch Mothers. So that's just how bad Sorc sustain is. So we do need a Magicka regen glyph in order to help us sustain. Now, in a very good group with Orbs and Worm, you might not need this Magicka regen glyph, in which case you can swap this out for a spell damage glyph. And then the other 2 glyphs are going to be spell damage, so you want at least 2 spell damage. I found that 2 regen glyphs is a little bit too much. You are giving up some damage, like using 2 regen glyphs, even if your sustain ends up being very, very good. So we just sticking with 1 regen glyph. I found that to be a happy medium. And again, if you feel like in raid you have enough support through Worm and Orbs, you can swap this out for a spell damage glyph. Now for our front bar traits, we have an Infused Inferno Staff with an Absorb Magicka enchant. Again, that's just to help out our sustain. With an Absorb Magicka enchant and a regen glyph, I found that I was able to basically fully sustain a 6-1 W parse, so I didn't have to use any heavy attacks at all. Now, of course, in a trial, you might want to swap this out for a weapon damage glyph, so your Berserker glyph. It's kind of up to you if you want to do that or not. It really depends on your group, how well you're able to sustain with Orb support, and if you are running Worm on any of your healers. Then for our back bar glyph, we're running Infused Maelstrom Inferno Staff with a flame damage enchant here. Now, that did change how back bar enchants work. So in the past, it used to be you had to be on your back bar in order for your back bar enchant to go off. So if you put down Blockade and swap to your front bar, it would proc your front bar enchant, not your back bar. Now it will proc your back bar enchant. So when you put down Blockade on your back bar and swap to your front bar, your Blockade will proc your flame damage enchant, and it will remember if it is infused or not. So that's why we have an Infused Inferno Staff on the back bar. Now there is another potential enchant combination that you can go for. You can reverse these if you'd like. You can go with the Absorb Magicka on the back bar, Inferno on the front bar. You will lose some DPS. I lost on average maybe around 1k DPS or so, but your sustain ends up being a lot better because you're able to proc Absorb Magicka cooldown. The other combination is you can go with 1 flame, 1 shock if you'd like. Typically speaking, your shock would be on the back bar and your flame would be on the front bar, but you can flip-flop them however you like. This will really help for group DPS because it'll help increase concussed uptime, which in turn increases minor vulnerability uptime. So one person running a shock glyph on the back bar is able to, on average, get up to 66% minor vulnerability uptime. So that's pretty good. So with 2 people running shock glyphs on the back bar, your healers don't need to run IA anymore. So that ends up being a potential option for groups if you don't want to run IA on your healers. Now, as for replacements, if you are going to go ranged, you will be running Ilambris instead of Zaan. Let me pull out Ilambris real quick. So Ilambris here, you can see here adds Max Magicka and the whole flame and shock damage, so you will need to add some extra health. If you want to go with all magic glyphs on all your armor pieces, then you can go with Skoria instead. This is going to be a little bit weaker than Ilambris for stationary targets, but for moving targets, Skoria will end up being better than Ilambris because Ilambris, the proc, will not follow the boss around. So Skoria will be preferred if you're in a fight where the boss is very mobile. So for example, Asylum is a good example of where you want to do Skoria, because you will be at range, and it'll be able to follow the mini-bosses around as they move and teleport around and things like that. And like I said, it allows you to run all Magicka glyphs instead of 1 health glyph. And then for our body piece, if you don't want to run Siroria, you can run either Mother Sorrow, you can run Julianos if you'd like. Those would be the 2 top ones that I would choose. You can also run Moondancer too if you don't want to give up Minor Slayer and still have a decent set. Moondancer is pretty nice. The spell damage or the regen procs are very strong for Sorcs. The regen really comes in handy, again, because Sorcs have bad regen, and the spell damage obviously just helps boost your damage. So Moondancer is actually a pretty strong choice as a replacement for Siroria if you are going a full range build. That being said, you are going to be relying on making sure to get those synergies. Now, the effective Moondancer lasts 30 seconds, so you do have that 10-second window, but you will need to make sure you're getting enough orb support or shard support, or you have other Sorcs running conduits in order to maintain 100% uptime on your Moondancer buffs. So that's kind of the downside of Moondancer, but I like Moondancer for ranged fights. So those are kind of your combinations there. And if you're running Mother Sorrow on the front bar, you can also do Burning Spellweave on your body piece if body set if you would like to do that. So you have a lot of different combinations here for Sorcs, and it's all going to vary depending on the specific fight that you have to do. So for things like stationary bosses where you have to play ranged, you can run Ilambris. If you're in a fight where you're moving around a lot and Siroria might not stack up a lot, you can do Mother Sorrow, Julianos, or Moondancer. If you are able to be in melee range, you're going to run Zaan, and if it's a mobile boss, you want to run Skoria instead of Zaan, maybe. So there's just a bunch of different combinations here. For armor traits, I do have all divines here, but if you want, you can go with, if you have a max Magicka enchant on a large piece, you can go with Infused there. It's a little bit better. Mathematically, it is stronger, but it's by such a small amount that I think it's easier just to stick with all divine. Alright, so now that we got all of the gear stuff out of the way, let's talk about our character sheets. This is kind of basic build stuff. So we are a Breton, however, you can go with the other magically inclined races. So Dark Elves are going to be strongest because you do have a lot of flame damage going on. They get 9% max Magicka and 7% additional flame damage and 2% additional shock and frost damage. High Elves are probably going to be also a very strong contender here. They get 4% flame shock, frost damage boost, but the main thing is they get 9% additional 9% Magicka regen, which again really helps out Sorc sustain. You need all the help you can get as a Sorc. And then 10% max Magicka. Bretons have 10% max Magicka. They get a very nice chunk of spell resistance, which helps out your survivability. So it's actually pretty nice to have that additional spell resistance, and you get a 3% cost reduction to your Magicka ability. So that does help out sustain a little bit. It's not as strong as the High Elves' 9% max Magicka regen, but it does help out a little bit. You can also go with Argonians if you'd like. So with Argonians, you actually don't need to run a health glyph either. You can run all Magicka glyphs because they get 9% max health. You do get a lot lower max Magicka though. You only get 3% max Magicka. So that's something you want to take into consideration if you do want to be an Argonian. But if you do PvP a lot, Argonians are pretty much the top race right now for PvP, mainly because of that potion passive where you drink a potion and you gain Magicka health and stamina back. So if you plan on PvPing on this tune on a Magicka Sorc, you might also want to consider being an Argonian, because it's still not a bad race for PvE. It's just not the best race for PvE. Now for attributes, all points are going into Magicka. That leaves us at about 16.3k health. With the Atro out, we are using the Atro as our primary ultimate. You're going to be sitting at about 17.5k before Evan and Warhorn. So it's not that big of a deal if you're at 16k. If you do feel like you need a little bit more health, you can shift some points into health, take them out of Magicka. It's kind of up to you how many you want to put. I personally wouldn't put more than 10, but again, it's kind of up to you and how much health you think is necessary for the content that you're running. For Mundustone, we're going with the Thief. You can go with the Apprentice if you'd like. That's kind of up to you which one you want to go for. If you are running a Berserker enchant on the front bar and Flame damage on the back bar, the Apprentice does win out by a very, very small margin, but the difference between the Thief and the Apprentice are pretty small, regardless of any sort of set combination that you're running. So I just stick with the Thief instead, but again, you can go with the Apprentice if you'd like. For food, we're running Witchmother's Potent Brew, again, for the additional regen here. It does mean we're giving up some max Magicka and max health, but we really, really need to sustain as a Sorc. There is a gold version of Witchmother's Potent Brew, the Clockwork Citrus Fillet. It's a little bit more expensive because it does use Perfect Row, so it is about 2k per food item itself. So don't feel like you have to use that if you don't think you can afford it. Witchmother's is perfectly fine for all the content in the game. Now for our skills, starting off with our front bar here. Crystal Frags here. This is still a pretty strong proc. It's not as strong as the bow proc from the Nightblades, but it still helps out to sustain because it does cost less Magicka, 50% when you have it proc. So it does help out you sustain a little bit there. Elemental Weapon, this is going to be our main spammable. We're using Elemental Weapon instead of Force Pulse. You can use Force Pulse if you'd like, just because Elemental Weapon costs less, so it does help out to sustain by a good amount. About Aegis here for the additional max Magicka. We have Endless Fury. You can go with the other morph if you'd like, which is a Mage's Wrath if you'd like. It's kind of up to you. Doesn't really matter which one you choose. The Inner Light for the additional Magicka, and then we have Fiery Rage. This is going to be mainly here for the Ancient Knowledge passive, but if you do need that additional Cleave ultimate, so there are fights where you might want to use the Thestra ulti to hit a bunch of ads that spawn with the boss, then you're obviously going to use Fiery Rage instead. And then for our back bar, this is where we'd put our shield, so I would put down, I would usually put down either of the two morphs here. So you can go with Hardened or Empowered Ward. I personally prefer Empowered because it does reduce the cost, increase the duration, it gives you minor intellect, which helps out you sustain. Not as strong as in Hardened Ward, which is okay. I think it's perfectly fine to run Empowered Ward, just for the additional minor intellect. There's not many sources of minor intellect, so Empowered Ward is really nice to have as your shield instead of Hardened. But again, you can go with either of them. Then we have Liquid Lightning, Haunting Curse, Blockade of Fire, and Rearming Trap. Now, if you are going to be running a ranged build, obviously you won't be able to use Rearming Trap, in which case you would use Accelerate. You would use Channel Acceleration from the Sigil Order line instead. Running Rearming Trap gives you a little bit better sustain because it uses your secondary resource, Stamina, versus your primary resource, Magicka. Unfortunately, Channel Acceleration does use Magicka instead of Stamina, so it does cut into your sustain by a little bit, but you don't have to cast it too often. It's every 35 seconds or so, so it's not that big of a Magicka drain, sustain loss compared to Rearming Trap. And for ultimate, we have the Greater Storm Atronach. This is, if you're going for single target DPS, this is the ultimate that you want to use. Make sure you're not putting it so it's between you and the boss, because when the Storm Atronach basically disappears, it counts as an entity, so you won't be able to attack through it. So try to throw it off to the side, close enough that your allies can hit it for the major Berserk synergy, but not, close enough that it will impede DPS when it has to despawn. Now for our champion points, the CB cap is now 780, which gives us 260 points across each of the 2 different constellation types. Starting off with the green CP, nothing has really changed here. We're still going with 75 Arcanist, 75 Tenacity. And for the remaining CPs, you can kind of split however you'd like, depending on whether you think you're going to use Break Free more often in a trial, or you're going to block more often in a trial. So I personally have 40 Shadow Ward, 40 Tumbling, 30 Warlord, but I will again kind of swap them around depending on which trial I'm running. So for example, Hoth, I might add a little bit more points to Warlord, take them out of Shadow Ward, for instance. Now for our blue CPs, I do want to iterate here that the blue CPs are optimized for a group that has Alkosh and Infused Crusher. So if you are not running one of those enchants or any of those debuffs, you're going to need to change your CP points around in order to get to that penetration cap. So you might need to put more points into erosion. You might even need to run the Lover. If you don't have Alkosh running at all, you might need to run the Lover instead to hit the penetration cap. So just be adaptable. So again, this is focused on having Alkosh and Infused Crusher. Not Torix Crusher, just an Infused Crusher. So we have 61 to Elfborn, 64 to Elemental Expert, 16 to Spell Erosion, 14 to Staff Expert, 61 to Master at Arms, and 44 to Thaumaturge. Sorcs generally will have a little bit more points in the Thaumaturge compared to some other classes, just because a lot of their damage does come from Douse Liquid Lightning is a prime example. Now, if you do need to put more points into Spell Erosion, you can take them out of Staff Expert. So if you use Constellations on a dummy parse, it's going to tell you to put more points into Staff Expert because there's a bigger proportion of your damage comes from lead attacks compared to like in a raid. So you don't actually need to put that many points into Staff Expert here if you don't want to. I just put it here because I didn't really find anywhere else. You could also take it out Staff Expert, bump Master at Arms up to 66, bump Elfborn up to 66 if you'd like, and then that'll leave you an extra 4 points to just kind of leave in Staff Expert. So if you do that, you are overshooting the jump points. So you can drop it down to 3, and add it to Spell Erosion like this. So your CP points look like that. The difference between these different CP setups is going to be pretty small overall. It's usually going to account for 0.5%, if not less, over your overall DPS. And then finally, for our red CPs, this is a more balanced approach. So it's not the best mitigation for all the trials. It's a good mitigation for all the trials. But if you're looking for optimizing the mitigation for a specific trial, you will need to shift your CP points around. So just keep that in mind here. So we have 66 into Ironclad, 56 into Thick-Skinned, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. That leaves 10 points, which we put into Bastion for the Field Physician passive, so that way we get the damage reduction when we're resurrecting somebody. It's a very nice passive to have if you're in a progression-style guild. Alright, so with all the build stuff out of the way, one last thing is we are using potions, Essence of Spell Power, so that's Lady Smock, Ward Hyacinth, and Cornflower. So we're going to be using this. This is our main source of Major Sorcery, Major Prophecy, and obviously the Magicka Restoration and Major Intellect for the additional regen there. So going over our rotation, so some builds I do want to point out do have Liquid Lightning on the front bar, so their bars will look like this. Some builds will do this, where they have Liquid Lightning on the front bar here instead of like Endless Fury maybe, or Crystal Frags. It's kind of up to you if you want to do that. I prefer having I'm one of the people who prefer having, you know, my dots all in my back bar, and I haven't really found that big of a difference running Liquid Lightning on the front bar compared to the back bar. So that's up to you. Now there is a Sorc out there, Royo, who is a very, very good Sorc, one of the best ones in the game actually. So he actually runs the other morph of Liquid Lightning, Lightning Flood, and the other morph of Blockade, which is Unstable Blockade, mainly because they share a same cooldown, so it's easier to go through that. It does require a lot of good sustain though, because a shorter cooldown. Both of them have shorter cooldowns, durations basically, which means you're going to have to cast them more often, which does take a hit obviously on your sustain because you're casting more blockades over the same period of time. So he's able to do that partially because he has very good group support through orbs. So you can do that if you'd like. It's not a bad option. However, I personally don't really find that to be very good overall. I mean, it's still very strong. He's able to pull very good DPS running Lightning Flood and Unstable Blockade. So again, that player's name is Royo, R-O-Y-O, so definitely check him out. He's probably on a couple of Discords, PvE Discords, and I don't know if he has a YouTube channel or a Twitch stream, but I will try to find out for you guys. But yeah, he runs Lightning Flood and Unstable Blockade, so don't feel like this build is like the absolute best build. There are plenty of other builds out there that pull better or the same amount of DPS as this build will. So starting off with the rotation here. So generally speaking, you always want to do Liquid Lightning and then Blockade, and that's just because durations will line up better. So Liquid Lightning has a 10-second duration, Blockade has an 8-second duration. So if you do a Blockade and then Liquid Lightning, you kind of have you have some more time on the Liquid Lightning compared to the Blockade. So you can see here we have 3 seconds remaining, which usually ends up with you overcasting Liquid Lightning. So that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it will ruin your sustain because you're casting more often than you really should. So Liquid Lightning and Blockade is better, just because the cooldowns will line up a little bit better that way. And then that's pretty much it. That's really the main thing that you want to make sure you're doing, which is Liquid Lightning and then Blockade. So Sorcs, you can play this a couple different ways. You can play mainly static rotation, where you always put down trap when you're on your back bar, when you are reapplying your dots. You can run curse when it runs out, but I prefer to go for a quasi-dynamic rotation, where when curse runs out, I'll actually swap to my back bar, reapply it, and go back to my front bar if there's still time left on my dots to do my spammable. So for the spammable, you will get the Crystal Frag procs, because it'll proc off of whenever you activate a Magicka ability. Make sure to use that proc pretty much right away, because if you sit on the proc, you won't be able to get a second proc, so you do want to get it off right away. Now sometimes you'll get the proc will happen right when you need to swap bars to put down your dots. I tend to just put my dots down, go back to my front bar, and then use the proc right away, but some people do the proc and then go on the back bar to do the dots. It's kind of up to you how you want to do that. And for execute for Sorc, start at 20%. That's when you want to use Endless Fury or Mage's Wrath. You will drop Quantum Curse. You will still maintain Liquid Lightning and Blockade, and you also still want to do your frag procs every now and then, because your frag procs will give you Minor Prophecy, which helps boost your spell crit. So you do want to get a Crystal Frag procs at the very least every other Blockade cast, just because the Minor Prophecy buff will last for 20 seconds. So 2 blockades will be 16 seconds. So that's kind of when you want to use your Crystal Frag procs. So I'll just do a real quick demonstration of the rotation on the 3 million dummy. So I like to start off with Rearming Trap or Challenge Acceleration, so you have Minor Force already going into the parse. So again, you want to do Liquid Lightning and then Blockade. It gets the frog proc off. That you want to make sure to get it off right away. Well, that's basically it. So you'll see here that course goes off, so I reapply it and swap back to my front bar before reapplying my dots again to get that one LA weapon off. We'll be doing a parse on 6-man dummy, so you guys can get an idea of what I'm able to pull with this particular build. And then you guys might be able to see a better example of when I will actually swap my back bar to reapply curse and then swap back to my front bar in order to continue using my spam bowl. And then for ultimates, like I mentioned earlier, if you have ads you need to cleave, use the Destra ulti. If you're going for pure single target, use the Storm Atronach. So for this parse, we're just going to be using the Storm Atronach, but again, just keep in mind that you might need to use your Destra ulti depending on the specific fight that you're doing. We will go ahead and do a 60-man W parse so you guys can get an idea of the sustain as well as the DPS you're able to pull with this build. I'll try to narrate throughout the parse. Now there is going to be a lot of variability with sword parses, just because you are kind of relying on the crystal frag proc, and it is a proc, so you know, you're not necessarily going to get the same amount for each parse. Normally it doesn't really result in that big a variation, but sometimes you can get really unlucky with RNG. So I hit Aegis instead of my curse because I missed the bar swap there. This is a prime example when curse went off, so I go back to my front bar here instead of reapplying my dots. Fortunately, I think hitting that Aegis might have ruined my sustain. I might need the heavy attack. Because I should have actually about 3k more Magicka. It's also the RNG with crystal frag procs can also kind of screw up the execute a little bit. So we are in execute, which means I will not be reapplying curse anymore, and we're just going to be using Endless Fury. Alright, so there we go. So yeah, the accidental Aegis did affect my performance a little bit, just because I ended up using more resources than I should have. But this is what I was able to pull, just shy of 42k. So you can see here light attacks. This is a dummy parse, so this isn't necessarily representative of a raid scenario, but light attacks do usually make up a very large portion of your DPS, so it's really important to get your weaving down. Liquid Lightning and Blockade of Fire, very important to maintain because they do a lot of damage here. We got lucky with Crystal Frag proc crits. We got 12 out of 15 crits, so that's pretty nice to have. And then you can see Absorb Magic actually doesn't do like very bad DPS. It does pretty decent DPS overall, but it's really just here for the extra sustain. So you can see that the Absorb Magicka glyph gives us an extra 125 sustain here. So that really does help us out. It is on our front bar here, so it is going to be lower than the theoretical max. So if it was on our back bar, we'd be able to get even more regen out of it at the cost of losing some DPS from our flame weapon, flame damage glyph here. So that's kind of where it stands here. Now, Crystal Frags here does hit pretty hard, so average is around 29k, and Endless Fury hits for about 27k. So that's kind of why you still want to run Crystal Frags when they go off. Again, not always, because there is kind of a delay. Crystal Frags proc is a channel, so you do lose about half of a global cooldown every time you run Crystal Frags, or rather I should say one global cooldown. So I wouldn't necessarily do Crystal Frags every time it procs, but again, you do want to maintain Minor Prophecy. So if you're the only Sorkin group that's running Crystal Frags, then yes, you will need to use Crystal Frags at least every 20 seconds to maintain that Minor Prophecy buff. So that's pretty much it for this video. If you guys have any questions or comments about this build specifically, or Mag Sorc in general, please feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. I will try my best to answer them to the best of my ability, and if I don't know the answer, I'll ask around, see if I can get an answer from somebody else who plays Sorc as their main DPS class. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.